This is the Citizens Wildfire Academy. We'll be starting in a few minutes. We're trying to let a few more people join us. We'll get going in just a few minutes. Okay, well, let's get going. My name is Bob Gardner, and I've been pulling together the Citizens Wildfire Academy sessions. This is session number 3. Our session this evening is speakers from our federal and state wildfire management, planning and management operations. And we have representatives from the U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Lands Management, and CAL FIRE. And they will share with us their plans and their management approaches and how they operate. I will just briefly say, of course, to remind everyone that these sessions are the third Monday of every month. We've had 2 sessions before. This is the third, as I said. The fourth will be July 18th, and we'll focus on fuel reduction and other treatment programs in the Eastern Sierra. The 5th will be a home hardening and defensible space in August, and then a couple more in September and October, and perhaps a couple more after that, given there's been additional interest for some other topics. Tonight, again, from our federal and state partners, we have 3 speakers. We have Lance Rosen, who is the Deputy Interagency Fire Management Officer from the Bureau of Land Management. And Lance is joined by Chance Traub. Chance is the Fire Management Specialist with the U.S. Forest Service, and they will make a presentation together. And then after that, we will have David Haas, who is a Forester 1 with CAL FIRE out of the San Bernardino Inyo-Mono unit of CAL FIRE. So we appreciate their willingness to join us tonight and talk about actually what they do and how they protect us and deal with the whole issue of wildfire. So first, Lance and Chance, go ahead, and thank you again for joining us.
I'll start just with the quick introduction before we start the presentation. Again, Lance Rosen. I've been in the area. I've been on the east side for about 35 years now. I've worked in fire management for almost 25 years, mostly with the Forest Service. The majority of my career was spent in large fire support, mostly assigned to hotshot crews. About 5-6 years ago now, I stepped into a district fire management position for the Forest Service out of Bishop on the White Mountain Ranger District. And then recently, I guess it's been 5 months now, I switched. Now we're in the BLM triangle there. And but we work closely here in an interagency program with the Forest Service, and my position as the deputy for the interagency program is to mainly oversee the operations when it comes to planning for fire response. So the way that we're going to break things up is I'll turn it over to Chance here in a second. He'll give his introduction, and then we'll start into the presentation. We'll talk about some national policy and bring it down to ground level and local, and then I'll speak to the operations and specific fire responses we have here in the Valley. Out of ease here, Chance is going to use my computer, so you'll see my name when he's talking. And I'll turn it over to him now.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. So, and thanks, Bob, for organizing this. So, little introduction. My name is Chance Traub. I've been kind of in this general area for about 8 years now. I've worked for the BLM. I originally came over and worked up at the station in Lundy on the engine there. And then I moved over to Mammoth and ran the engine right out of Mammoth. So, very familiar up and down in Mono County. A couple years ago, about 2 years ago, I took the fire ecologist job down out of Bishop. And so I've been working over the last 2 years on fuels management plans, kind of forest wide. And then just recently, so about 2 weeks ago, I took a new job as the fire management specialist out of the SO, essentially doing the same thing. So working on fire, prescribed fire and fuels, and overseeing that program for the Inyo National Forest. Previously, before that, I've had 20 years in fire, started in New Mexico, worked a little bit up in Northern California, and kind of similar to Lance in large fire support on hotshot crews, engines, and smoke jumping. So, you know, I have a wide range of experience, both on the ground and in the planning side of things. So we're going to start this, and I'm going to share my screen here. And let me know when you can see this.
Got it.
Okay. So we're going to talk about wildfire management plans and policies. You know, we're going to look at the U.S. Forest Service and the BLM. And as Lance talked about, we work in an interagency program here on the Inyo and Bishop BLM field office. So we're both land management agencies. And I think that's the key to working on this interagency program, is that we have really similar missions. And I think to start, you got to really understand the mission, and then we can move into the policies and the plans. So just kind of give you a rundown on how we're looking at breaking this up, is that I'm going to give a little bit of an overview on both agencies, their fire organization, and that, you know, these plans and policies aren't developed in a vacuum. You know, they're tied to the agency as a whole. What happens here on the Inyo and the Bishop BLM field office on their ground is all part of a larger planning area, you know, within the Forest Service's National Forest System and the field offices districts. So you kind of have to understand that landscape before we can really dive down into the policies really deep. But the mission for the Forest Service is to sustain the health and diversity and productivity of the national forests and grasslands to meet the needs of present and future generations. The BLM's is really similar. The mission is to sustain the health and diversity and productivity of public lands for the use and enjoyment of present and future generations. So I think that really sets both agencies up to move in a similar direction for fire policy and for planning. So let me see. Can you see that PowerPoint? Go forward here.
No.
Okay. Okay, how about now? Okay, so the BLM is under, you know, a larger department. So it's Department of Interior, and for fire and pretty much all other, you know, fire organizations under the Interior, they're broken up into watersheds. Well, they're broken up into regions based on watersheds. So under the Department of the Interior, you have the BLM, you have the National Park Service, you have Bureau of Indian Affairs, and you have U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So each one of those agencies actually has, you know, wildland fire crews, and they also are attached to this larger wildfire kind of national planning effort. So for the Forest Service, we're broken up into 9 regions. You can oversee here, Region 5 is all of California. That's the Pacific Southwest region. Then you also have the Southwest region, Region 3. Bordering us is Region 4, which includes Nevada. And then you have further to the north, Region 6 in Portland, Washington. You have Region 1, kind of that Montana and North Dakota. The reason why this is important is that for the Forest Service and those other land management agencies, the United States has, a fire. Their fire is normally, occurring at different times of the year. So, as one area or one region, has their fire season maybe starting early in the year, another area isn't really, maybe they're out of fire season, maybe it's their wet time of year. And this is going to become really important as we talk about resources and the sharing of resources and the moving of people to help support the fire efforts and large fire efforts throughout the nation over the fire season. So the land management agencies, so around 15,000, there are around 15,000 federal wildland firefighters. So 5,000 of those are under the Department of Interior, spread out amongst the Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Park Service, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Then the next bulk of folks come from the U.S. Department of Agriculture under the Forest Service. And so the Forest Service has around 10,000 wildland firefighters spread out across the United States. So their jobs, many of those are seasonal firefighters. And I would say, 3/4 moving into 3/4 are starting to become permanent. Right now, there's a big push to bring in permanent wildland firefighters versus seasonals as we have this, move from a fire season to more of a fire year, which is similar what's going on in California, but also other regions are also having this transition from, more of a normal fire season to more of an abnormal fire year. So to bring that down to here, Mono County and the Inyo National Forest and the Bishop BLM field office, you'll see this map. So the Inyo National Forest has around just shy of 2 million acres. The Bishop BLM field office has around 750,000 acres that we were responsible for fire response. So the one thing that is kind of key to note, and it's not on this map, but we cover Inyo County, Fresno County, Mono County, and Tulare County. We also have a little bit of land that we're responsible for in fire management over on the Nevada side. And so we're also responsible and respond to fires just over the border in Nevada in Mineral County and Esmeralda County. You can also see that the Inyo National Forest and Bishop BLM, they border the Sierra National Forest, Yosemite, and Kings Canyon. And that becomes really important when understanding kind of these jurisdictional issues with different land management agencies and how we look at fire. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, but because we're all under one national fire direction, we actually have an equal and an understanding that crosses boundaries, and we can work more easily together. So this map shows a little more detail, the Bishop Field Office Fire Management Unit. It's highlighted in blue, and it's kind of that tannish color. So you can see that it pushes up actually all the way through Mono County, touches in Colville, so past Mono County, and then you have the Bridgeport Valley. That area by Bridgeport is actually covered by the Forest Service, and that is part of Region 4. So that's not the Inyo National Forest's responsibility. That's the Humboldt-Tyabe. However, that's another Forest Service forest. So we all have the same policies, overarching policies and guidance. For the Inyo National Forest, so the Inyo National Forest is broken up into 4 ranger districts. You have Mono Lake, Mammoth, White Mountain, and Mount Whitney. Thing to note for Mono County, it touches 3 different ranger districts. So Mono Lake, Mammoth, and there's a small section of White Mountain also by Swall. So I mentioned earlier, all these land management agencies are tied based on a coherent policy. So it was written in 1995 and revised in 2001. It's the Federal Wildland Fire Management Policy. And so that policy is really integral in ensuring that there's a consistent and coherent strategy for wildfire management. So in that management and in that document, it identifies fire as a critical natural process that will be integrated into the land and resource management plans and activities on a landscape scale across agency boundaries. Response to the wildland fire is based on ecological, social, and key legal consequences of fire. Let me go back real quick. So the circumstances under which a fire occurs and the likely consequences on firefighter and public safety and welfare and natural and cultural resources and values to be protected dictate the appropriate management response. And so that's really important. That management response and the appropriate managed response based on the land management plan and also the fire management plan. So recently there's been some big changes, or some new developments and changes in the strategy. So in 2009, the Federal Land Agency Management and Enhancement Act, or known as the FLAME Act in 2009, was signed. So in that, it put upon the land resource or the land management agencies to come up with a national cohesive wildland fire management strategy to address the changes in wildland fires that we're seeing today. So to address the larger fires that were occurring and that we've seen occur recently. So that national cohesive management, it identified restoring and maintaining landscapes, fire adapted ecosystems. So, doing things that we're doing right now in this presentation, informing and also helping communities with wildfire, with defense around those areas, and then also with strategies to protect those communities and their infrastructure. And then also a wildfire response, so that all jurisdictions participate in making and implementing safe, effective, efficient, risk-based wildland fire management decisions. The Forest Service just recently put out a strategy that's essentially tiered off this national cohesive wildland fire management strategy. And it's to address the 10-year wildfire crisis. And so what they're looking at is implementing fuels programs and projects up to 20,000 or 20 million acres on Forest Service land and up to 30 million acres on other lands, federal and private. Also, with this, the U.S. Forest Service here in Region 5 in California and the state have went into an MOU to help do, I think it's around 1 million acres per year of fuels treatments, both prescribed, mechanical, and handwork, such as like thinning. So the DOI, they have regional policies based on those regions that I showed you earlier. And then the Forest Service also has regional policies specific to those regions, because not every region is the same. And we all have, particular differences that may need to be addressed due to ecological differences within those areas. But the one guiding principle across all these also is the guidance put out in the policy, and the main focus is firefighter and public safety, having the role of wildfire as an essential ecological process and natural change agent to be incorporated into the planning process, and that everyone, both agencies, need to have fire management plans and programs that support the land and resources they are in charge of. So, everybody has a shared vision, and I think that's important. One of the big shared visions that's laid out in these plans is definitions. And so, when it comes to wildland fires, I think a definition of what we call these fires is really important. So it's laid out that a wildland fire is any non-structure fire that occurs in vegetation or natural fuels. They can be categorized in two distinct types. So wildfires, which is an unplanned ignition or prescribed fire that has been declared a wildfire. So these unplanned ignitions can occur as human-caused ignitions that are unauthorized or accidental human-caused fire. And also, in the other case, would be a prescribed fire that has to be declared a wildfire, because it is escaped the confines of the prescribed fire unit. The other type is a natural ignition. So lightning would be an example. Volcanoes is another example. So that's a wildfire that may be concurrently managed for one or more objectives, and objectives can change as the fire spreads across the landscape. Objectives are affected by change in fuels, weather, topography, and varying social understanding and tolerance. And involvement of other governmental jurisdictions have different missions and objectives. So, as a fire moves from, let's say, the Forest Service to the BLM land, there may be a change in the response to that fire. Likewise, if fire moves from a CAL FIRE or state DPA onto BLM, maybe there's going to be a difference. The next type of fire is prescribed fire. So these are planned ignitions, and it's a wildfire originating from a planned ignition in accordance with applicable laws, policies, regulations to meet specific objectives. And these objectives are lined out in an environmental assessment through the NEPA process, and then developed through a burn plan, and then implemented through that burn plan. So I'm first going to go into prescribed or planned ignitions. So these are photos from prescribed burns occurring here on the Inyo National Forest. The pile burns here are from piles created down by South Fork on the southern end of the forest, middle of the forest on the White Mountain Ranger District. Around that community we created these during some thinning. To the left here, where my cursor is, that was near Antelope. It's Antelope RX, so just to the east and north of Mammoth Lakes. So the smoke, I think it's really important, the smoke that you see right here was created by this photo and the flames that you see right below it. So, in prescribed fire, large volumes of smoke don't always mean extreme fire behavior. This white smoke is an indication a lot of times of small burning of the brush and small flame lengths with moderate fire behavior. So kind of transitioning from those planned events to the unplanned events, we're going to look back at now at the Bishop Field Office Fire Management Unit. So the policy in their fire management plan is to make use of wildland fire and prescribed fire as a natural process and as a tool incorporate the role of wildland fire as essential ecological process. However, depending on where that fire occurs and how that fire occurs, these options, may or may not be used. It's also fire management plans and activities are based on the best available science and support the Bureau of Land Management and the natural and cultural resources and the management goals and objectives. And we'll talk about how that affects an unplanned ignition. Lance will cover that. For the Forest Service side, the Forest Service, a little bit larger area, and with the recent 2019 land management plan, the Inyo National Forest developed the fire management zones, and these zones help define a strategy that we may take when an ignition occurs. So the response strategies that could occur are full suppression, confine, contain, monitor, or manage to meet resource objectives. And the purpose of the strategic fire management zones is to support the decision makers when a fire ignition occurs, to figure out what response they need to take and what strategy they should use in response of that strategy. The thing that you should know is that all these strategies can occur in any one of the strategic fire management zones. The zones are as followed. So there's community wildfire protection zone, there's the general wildfire protection zone, and then there's the wildfire restoration and maintenance. The main differences with those, and as you can see based on this map, is proximity to high values at risk, so around communities, infrastructure, and then also proximity within the wilderness areas. So I think highlighting the community wildfire protection zones, the main goal is to protect communities, life and property from the negative impact of wildfires. For the general wildfire protection zone, is to protect natural resources from the negative impacts of wildfire and prevent direct threats of life or property in nearby communities. The wildfire, so in the restoration zones, it is to create fire resilient landscapes that can be restored and maintained by managing wildfires to meet multiple objectives, prescribed fires and fuel reduction through prescribed fire and fuels reduction treatments. And then in the wildfire maintenance zones, the goal is to allow wildfire that poses a low threat to communities in average, that may pose a low threat to communities, and allow, if the conditions allow natural fire and resources to benefit the wildfire area. So, being able to manage a wildfire to allow for to benefit the area. And the reason why we'd be able to do that is the low proximity to or the proximity to any values at risk. So this is kind of a larger blow up of those strategic fire management zones around the Mammoth Lakes. So you can see the community protection zones, and then also you can see out in the wilderness areas that aren't right adjacent to Mammoth Lakes, there's the wildfire maintenance zones. And then the other kind of protection and restoration zones are mixed in there. And like I said, these are goals, and those strategies, any of those strategies can be used in any type of zone. And so when those decisions are made, the land management agencies and the agency administrators look at these zones and look at maybe the time of year, the weather, and then they make those decisions based on the best science available. We don't always maybe decide to manage a fire for multiple benefits, even in the wilderness areas, based on the time of year and resources availability. So, it's always in conjunction. Those decisions are made in conjunction with wildland, the fire management, and also the agency administrators. So the district rangers and the forest supervisor here on the Inyo National Forest. So that kind of leads into this planning for a fire response. And this is where Lance is going to take over and talk about, if and when we do get a fire, how we respond, and then talk about the different fire response options.
Okay, you still hear me okay there, Bob? Okay. All right, so like Chance said, we're gonna get into the actual on the ground, what happens before, during, and after we get a call to respond to a fire. We'll try to cover the who, the where, the what, the when, the how, and the why, based on some of the stuff that Chance just presented as far as our national policy goes. And I understand we're a little strapped for time, so I might hurry through some of this stuff. And if I miss something, we'll have time to address it during the questions. Okay, so what you see here on the screen is a resource status report, and this is continuously updated as resources move around. Usually first thing in the morning, what'll happen is engines will come into service, typically 9:30-ish, depending on fire activity, and they'll put themselves in this system to allow dispatch to show them as being on and available to respond. And that is moving throughout the day. So if one engine leaves from Bishop and goes up to Mammoth, they'll call in service to dispatch, let them know, hey, we're in service en route to an area other than where they're showing on that morning report, which is what we're seeing here. This is all public information. And again, it just continuously gets updated. I just happened to pull this one on the 18th at 2:20. So you can kind of see where all of our stuff was. You can see what's committed, but this is essentially a list of all of our resources for the INYO and Bishop BLM. Okay, so I know this is a lot, and I'll try to break it down. What I want to key in on first is the response type level row, where it says low, moderate, and high. Our dispatch strategies, which means what we respond to a reported wildfire, is all dependent on our fire danger ratings. So our fire danger ratings are taken into account what the condition of the fuel is, and also what the condition of the weather and the weather forecast is for that particular day. As a general rule, I'd say it's tough because the forest and Bishop BLM is so spread out north to south and elevation wise. So it's tough to give a general, but if I had to answer the question, I'd say usually in the middle of winter, we're in a low. In the spring and fall, we're in a moderate, and all summer long, we're in a high response. And so we base it on what the potential fire danger is. And again, this will change on a daily basis. So it might be low one day, and then there may be predicted winds for the following day, and the following day it'll jump up to a high. Those of us that have been around a while understand that the wind definitely plays a huge factor in our fire growth here, and everywhere for that matter. So acronyms, or just what these mean. So in a low response, we're sending right off the gate one engine, one water tender, one patrol, which is a pickup truck with 100 gallons or so, and a law enforcement. We respond to every incident as if it's a potential emergency or crime scene. So we include that law enforcement on all of our responses. And then you can see how it jumps up on the moderate level. This CO means chief officer. So that would be one of our battalion chiefs or one of our division chiefs responding as well. One helicopter, two engines, one water tender, one crew, two patrols, and again, the law enforcement. And then jumps up to a high response. So this is where we sit normally during the summer. We get a call, might be from an aircraft, might be from somebody seeing a smoke somewhere, but the call will come in, usually a 911 type of thing. It'll get transferred over to our interagency dispatch center. It'll get plotted on a map, and then they'll hit the tones, which beeps out on everybody's radios, and that will be what is expected to respond. One chief officer, one helicopter, three engines, and so forth. I'll get into these general protection wilderness. This corresponds a little bit to what Chance was talking about. And I'll also get into the CAL FIRE assist, and then he briefly mentioned the Humboldt Toyabe in that area north of essentially the Bodie Road. That is kind of the general response. Okay, so kind of breaking it down even farther. So this is obviously the Mono County side. We have every area identified and delineated with a certain number and letter. As you can see, the numbers correspond to the districts. So you remember Chance was saying the Mono district. So everything in 11 is on the Mono district. Everything in It starts with 2 is the Mammoth District, 3 is the White Mountain District, and then down below that you can't see here is the Mount Whitney District. So that just gives the responders an idea of where that fire is located. But what really gives them the most information is the letter afterwards. So the P, and you can see over here in the key. So the P means that this is a protection area, which means that there's likely something in that area that there's some type of infrastructure within that fire response area. Most of those correspond to, you can see along the 395 corridor, where most of our communities are. And then some areas just like, you're like, well, that's kind of interesting. How come that one? Well, how come 12 Papa there, where you have a lot of the east side of Mona Lake? Well, you got high transmission power lines. And so all that stuff comes into play when identifying what that letter is. So protection, we hear that on the radio. That's like, okay, hey, there's something there within that unit that we need to pay attention to. That could mean, as the chief officer responding, that may mean like, hey, that's high priority. We probably should go above and beyond what our initial response was, and they could start that request for additional resources, just depending on the conditions that they're seeing or the smoke that they're seeing while en route. General areas, which is the Gs, don't necessarily have a set of any type of infrastructure nearby. It's kind of the in between there. So it doesn't mean that if the fire doesn't move, it might cross these boundaries into a protection unit. But again, it's just solely for the initial response to get the firefighters that are responding to thinking about what values are at risk. Continuing on, wilderness areas, obviously for W, and then the CAL FIRE responsibilities areas. And it's important to note too, CAL FIRE, they are responsible for protecting all the, well, I shouldn't say all, most of the BLM lands in Inyo County. So we have an agreement that allows them to protect the BLM lands, so BLM jurisdictional lands, but they have the authority and the protection responsibility for those lands. And because of that, we work really closely with our CAL FIRE partners. We rely on them a lot to respond to our incidents after hours, because we don't have people on 24 hours a day. So it's important, you know, we're pretty isolated here on the east side, between our volunteer fire departments and CAL FIRE and the resources that both the Inyo and BLM provide. If anything gets big, it's a long time before we're getting help. So we try to maintain some pretty close, tight-knit relationships with our cooperators. Okay, so now that we kind of came through that, I think I got everything. The only thing I'll briefly mention was the H. So the H is the Humboldt-Toyabe, and what we have is an agreement with the Humboldt-Toyabe that north of the Bodie Road, which is this black line, if you can follow my cursor there, north of there, the Humboldt-Toyabe takes on the initial attack responsibility for those lands. We have the Bishop BLM field office has one engine located up in Topaz. And that's a joint facility with the Forest Service, the Humboldt-Toyabe Forest, and the Bridgeport Ranger District engine is both housed there. And then the Bridgeport also has 2 engines that are staffed out of town there. So that's the H. All right, so now we're going to jump into kind of a typical fire response. So doesn't matter the time of year or anything, initial response, always, we just assume it's an emergency. Doesn't matter where it's at, because we don't know yet until we get folks on scene to determine if it's actually a true emergency. because again, our thought process has changed, over the last 100 years. It's changed from, hey, we need to get out and put every fire out before 10 a.m. to, and maybe we are not necessarily setting ourselves up for success in the future when it comes to suppressing every single fire that starts. But again, initial response, hey, we go out the door like there's something there immediately that needs protection. Quick run card. I won't get caught up too much on it. It corresponds to what we talked about earlier with the dispatch strategy. The only thing is that this fire that we have here was reported. It'll go out. It'll reported in 22 Gulf, which is the Bald Mountain response area. This is an accumulative response here between low, moderate, and high. So on a high response, on a high fire danger day, all of these resources would be going to that incident. The other thing to note too is, so this information is available, as you can see at the bottom, this information is available for every one of those response areas, and it'll identify what things to look out for essentially. So dispatch will see that and be able to relay that information to those responders. You can see here, hey, there's areas in that unit that are no go for retardant because the Owens River headwaters run through there, and we keep retardant, or try to keep retardant at least 300 feet away from waterways unless there's a life threat. You see key sage grouse habitat, other things, culture resources possible. There's rare plants, there's invasive plants, all things that come into play for determining the strategy to manage that incident under. All right, so what happens now? We get folks on scene. So first thing to do is we got some information gathering happening. It's not necessarily an immediate, hey, we need to put that fire out. Our perspectives have changed somewhat, but there are times, again, is there a threat? Is there and this is the easy one, right? There's always, you could always make the argument that there's a threat. And we'll get into the hard decision making here in a couple of slides. But first thing, immediately, right off the bat, whoever that first person, whoever that first resources on scene makes that determination. Do we have a serious threat to people, structures, or natural resources? Other information gathering, so the location, talked about the ownership, the jurisdiction. Again, that comes into play because even though we'd like to say, like Chance was saying, it's nice because at least the federal agencies have the same wildfire direction coming down nationally, there's still within each agency's land management plan, there's different verbiage that allows us to go one way or the other. Hey, Bob, if I just got a note from Chance, like, hey, speed it up. But if I need to speed it up, let me know, or cut me off so David doesn't.
Okay, we got we go usually till 7:30. We just may have a little less time for questions, but you're covering a lot, so there may not be that many questions.
Okay,
go ahead. Just try to wrap it up here.
All right, so determining the cause, this is another one, going back, hey, depending on what that cause of that fire is, may determine our strategy, may determine a different strategy used for whether we fully suppress or manage for multiple objectives. And then the location of that fire also determines, hey, maybe it's in a spot where it's not safe. Remember, Chance stressed that at the beginning, as far as the first priority is the safety. And that comes into play as well, especially here on the east side, where a lot of our high elevation lightning fires tend to start. Some of them are just simply inaccessible. So again, we find out that, and then we decide how we're going to manage that incident. 99% of the fires, especially now, seems like with the fires that we're getting, everybody's a little on edge, a little wary. Again, the easy answer, we suppress the fire, but a lot goes into that decision. Chance mentioned this. So we have options, right? Suppression, but we also could manage for resource benefit or other resource objectives. Or like you said, could have a combination of both on the same fire. All right. Okay, I hate flow charts. Sorry, but I had to. We're gonna start up here in this gray circle. So again, it's just a decision-making process here, but a lot of stuff goes into it. So is a fire threatening public safety, infrastructure, natural cultural resources? Yes, full suppression automatically. If not, well, then you ask, hey, does the agency, does that jurisdictional agency that fire has responsibility for have a plan, a pre-existing plan that allows for other than full suppression? If no, full suppression. If yes, well, then hey, is this an area where, and these are tough calls. These aren't necessarily being made by folks that are on the ground, you know, our firefighters. This is information getting sent back and saying, hey, we do have an accumulation of fuels here. This isn't an immediate threat. What do you think? But again, easy answer, no, can't benefit. And there are some areas, we've seen some areas that burn through, especially in BLM lands, that completely converts from a sagebrush type to almost primarily a bed of cheatgrass, which doesn't help for future fires. And then the big one is their support. There's a lot that goes into this, but maybe their support, right? And then what? What are we going to do? Everything's based on a risk management decision. The decision makers are weighing out a lot here. They're getting a lot of information, and it's a really tough decision to make. A lot of folks are involved in these decisions. There's impacts, there's smoke impacts, there's potentially impacts to a lot of other natural resources. There's side effects that may surface after we decide to manage a fire for resource benefit. But ultimately, we're gathering as much intelligence. We're using that best available science. We're talking to our biologists, our botanists, our watershed. Hey, this is the fire. We're using models to determine what's the possibility of fire growth. We're looking at the time of the year. Is this a fire that we have the resources to manage? Again, that goes back to what Chance briefly mentioned about the national part of things. So there's not enough resources. We've seen that the last couple of years. There's not enough resources to really manage the amount of fires that we're getting right now. So there's a lot of prioritization that happens. So there may be times a year where it was like, yeah, that would have been a good fire potentially to use to help clean up some of the overgrowth of fuels, but not the right time for it now. It's tough to make those decisions early in the fire season too. You know, you're potentially looking at something, probably some of you remember pretty clearly the Lions fire was something that felt like it was a pretty good call, but there was some side effects there with some long-term smoke impacts. And it ended up, I think probably when it was all said and done, three or 4 months long incident there. So, but again, that easy decision is to put that fire out. But it might not necessarily be the right one to meet what our agency's missions are. Again, just to reiterate, Chance read them to earlier, but we're trying to manage for the benefit of not only today, but the future as well. So that's it. I'll pass it over to David and finish us off.
Okay, thank you, Lance and Chance. David Haas from CAL FIRE, give us your perspective from CAL FIRE's operations.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. My name is David Haas. I'm the CAL FIRE San Bernardino Unit Forester. registered professional forester, licensed pest control advisor, got a degree in forestry from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I worked in the timber industry for about a decade. I came to Cal Fire in 2015. I worked in the urban forestry program for 4 or 5 years, and then I've been in the San Bernardino unit for 3 years. And so I'm going to dive right into it here. All right, should be able to see that.
You got it.
Perfect. All right. Wait, which screen are you seeing? Maybe I don't want to share that one. Can you see the PowerPoint? Can you see my desktop?
Yeah, we can see we see the PowerPoint, but we also see your desktop. You need to go to full screen there.
Okay. Let's stop this try. All right. Share that screen. All right.
There you go.
Perfect. So this is a breakdown of what I'm going to discuss. Who are we? What do we do? Where do we do it? So this is the organizational chart of the department, roughly. So let's say, for example, the legislature passes an assembly bill that changes defensible space standards, which they did, and which will be coming into effect potentially in 2023. The Board of Forestry and Fire Protection is responsible for taking that legislation and turning it into rules that CAL FIRE then enforces or implements, we'll say. So the Board of Forestry is not directly related to CAL FIRE, but it's a direct corollary, and we're pretty closely involved with each other. But within CAL FIRE, we are the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. We're the state's fire department. We're also the regulatory agency for commercial forestry in the state, and we have many other resource management responsibilities. Also within CAL FIRE is the Office of the State Fire Marshal. We'll go into that a little later. And then also, what we're probably most well known for, other than our immediate emergency response, is, large scale incident management, whether that's a wildfire or the mudslides in Montecito or the Oroville Dam. We have the knowledge, resource, and capabilities to manage those large incidents. And that's our mission statement. We serve and safeguard the people and protect the property and resources of California. And ultimately, every decision we make comes down to achieving that mission. So the state is broken up into 21 administrative units for CAL FIRE. As Bob mentioned, the San Bernardino unit covers San Bernardino, Inyo, and Mono counties. And then we have 6 contract counties. So in those counties, we pay the county fire department to do CAL FIRE's job, essentially, is what it comes down to. And most of them are in Southern California, and then you've got Marin up in the northern part of the state. This is just a brief rundown of the unit. So every administrator or every contract county has an administrative unit. We're the administrative unit for LA County, just meaning, they are clear to send a certain number of resources, like Lance mentioned, the dispatches based on low, moderate, and high response levels. So as a contract county, LA can dispatch certain resources just automatically without asking anything. That's what they're paid for. If they go above, or if they need a response above that predetermined initial response, then they have to come to us as the administrative unit and say, can we order these resources? Because at that point, they're now expending state funds, which they don't have the authority to do. And so us as representatives of the state have the authority to say, yeah, order those resources for the state mission. So in our unit, we had 4 conservation camps. Those are our inmate camps. Up in Inyo County, we have the Owens Valley Conservation Camp. In the southern part of the unit, we've got Prado and Chino, Fenner Canyon, which is in the high desert area, and the California Institute for Women, also in Chino. So that is where female inmates get training before they go out to the camps and join fire crews. We had a 5th conservation camp, Pilot Rock. It's in the San Bernardino Mountains near Silverwood Lake. But a year or 2 ago, well, just generally there's a lack of inmates in our prison system. And so we depopulated several camps throughout the state because we just didn't have the inmate population to sustain the crews that we once did. So we converted those camps to fire centers, and they're now staffed with paid firefighter hand crews, similar to a hotshot crew, we'll say. So Pilot Rock was one of those camps. It's no longer an inmate camp. It's now a fire center, as we call them. Within the unit, we've got 13 stations spread across San Bernardino and Inyo County. We don't have any stations in Mono County. And then also local jurisdictions, cities and counties can hire CAL FIRE to be their fire department. And so within the unit, we are the fire departments for the city of Highland and Yucaipa. I know this is a busy slide. So Lance and Chance kind of touched on some of these topics, and I know it's very text heavy. You don't have to read all that, but when it comes to wildland fire suppression in the state, there's two considerations. There's the jurisdiction or the responsibility area. And you may frequently hear the phrase SRA, FRA, LRA. So those are local responsibility area, state responsibility area, and federal. The long and the short of it is, if it's federal lands, you know, BLM, Forest Service, Department of Defense, National Park, whatever, that's federal responsibility area, and they have statutory jurisdiction to control fires in there and the financial responsibility to do so. Annexed cities, areas in the state that don't meet this very lengthy definition of state responsibility area are local responsibility area. And that's where your city and county fire departments have the responsibility for wildland fire suppression. Everywhere else in the state is state responsibility area. And that's the yellow in this map. Green is federal, gray is local. And so essentially, if it's covered in forest or grass or brush, it's going to be state responsibility area. So the kind of partner to that SRA concept is direct protection area, and both Lance and Chance mentioned this as well. So right, so state responsibility area, federal responsibility area, I know those are mouthfuls, which is why we just say SRA or FRA. So which is how I'll refer to them from here on out. So those again are statutorily defined. For SRA, it's by public resource code, but based on the availability of resources throughout the state and federal agencies come to an agreement. They say, you know what, really, it makes more sense for CAL FIRE or the Forest Service or BLM to put fires out in different parts of the state. For instance, in Mono County, there are no CAL FIRE stations, right? Our closest station is the Owens Valley camp at the base of the grade there. And so all of the state SRA in Mono County is the direct protection responsibility of BLM or the Forest Service, because they have the resources close by to put a fire out. And so again, lengthy definitions here, but these two bottom bullet points are the easiest way to remember it. The SRA is who has the legal responsibility for fire suppression. The DPA is who's actually going to show up to that fire first. And this is actually the next slide. This is a little easier way to digest that, I think. So on the left here is the SRA map, right? So the yellow is SRA, the green is FRA, Federal Responsibility Area. I'll also say, again, I didn't grow up in the Forest Service. I know there are a heck of a lot of acronyms out there, and unless you deal with it every day, it's very overwhelming. And I'll just say this right now. If anybody ever has questions about this and wants to discuss it further, I'll have my contact information. You can always reach out to me. I know Lance and Chance feel the same, or any of our chief officers at the Owens Valley camp as well. So on the right side is the direct protection area. So green being the Forest Service, yellow being BLM, right? So you can kind of see this, how, you know, if you have a fire in Mono County, it's probably going to be a federal resource that shows up there to put that fire out. The considerations that Lance mentioned aside. So, and I'll kind of, I get these questions a lot just because they say, well, why'd you show up to my fire? And this is the reason why. And DPA is negotiated between the two agencies. So, you know, we may say, hey, BLM, you know, it makes more sense for you to put the fires out in Mono County, but in Inyo County, right, CAL FIRE puts the fire out, as Lance mentioned. So it's kind of agreed upon by the two agencies, and it tries to be reciprocal and balanced, so nobody's left with something that's more than they should be financially responsible for. All right, so that is who we are and where we work. Next, what do we do? So before a fire starts, this is this is where the foresters live, the resource management part of the department. So every unit in the state has a unit fire plan where it breaks down, goals of the unit, partners, priority areas for us to conduct fuel reduction project and prescribe fire, and all sorts of resources like that. And so these are all available on the internet. This is the link that's, again, not very user friendly. So that's why I put down here. If you were interested in the San Bernardino Unit Fire Plan, you could just Google OSFM, the Office of the State Fire Marshal, Unit Fire Plan. And it'll take you to a web page with our department's strategic plan and every unit's fire plan as well. And there's some good information in there if you're interested. And these are updated annually. So what else do? We enforce the defensible space standards in the state responsibility area again. So if you live in SRA, chances are you're going to have a CAL FIRE resource come out and do a defensible space inspection. We do delegate that authority to other agencies if they're willing to take on that responsibility. I don't know off the top of my head who does it in Mono County, but in Inyo County, depending on where you are, we'll go out and do those defensible space inspections. And everything that we do as a department comes back to PRC, Public Resource Code. That's what tells us to do what we need to do as a department. And these are the standards you hear, 0 to 30 feet, lean and green, 30 to 100 feet, you're doing some thinning and stuff like that. And so the form that we use to do defensible space inspections are publicly available on the internet if you're ever curious and wanted to make sure you're in compliance. And as I referenced earlier, there is a new standard coming out. It was passed by the legislature during COVID, and so they delayed it because they didn't want to place a financial burden on anybody. But there will be a 0 to 5 foot ember resistant zone, let's say, where essentially you can't have anything flammable within 5 feet of your house. That can take effect as early as January 1 of 2023, but we're still waiting on direction from the Board of Forestry. And so here's an example of good defensible space on the right, and not so good defensible space up on the left here. And then also we do fuel reduction work. So Chance mentioned kind of our joint effort of 1 million acres a year treated for fuel reduction. So that stemmed from Governor Brown passed an executive order in 2018 saying we as a state will treat 500,000 acres per year for fuel reduction. And that's a combination of CAL FIRE crews doing direct work, grants we administer, just other agencies, Fish and Wildlife, state parks, etc. Anybody that owns and manages land as a state agency. And so we have a very, very big push to do fuel reduction work. When Governor Brown passed that executive order, the federal government came in and said, we will match you. We'll do 500,000 acres per year of fuel reduction, which is where that 1 million acres per year came from. We are doing our darndest to get there, but it is, there's a lot of challenges associated with it. So that can be something, fuel reduction, like I said, doing, cutting brush, thinning trees, chipping, pile burning, masticating, etc., manual, mechanical treatments. And then we also do prescribed fire. Governor Newsom, he released his Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan recently, and he set a goal of treating 400,000 acres per year with prescribed fire, which is also a very heavy lift because there are many, many challenges associated with using fire as a management tool, from logistics to environmental considerations and everything in between. But that's this picture on the left here. This is one of our prescribed fires we did in Inyo County. And that's an easier spot for us to do that work because LADWP owns a lot of the land, and it's logistically a little easier for us to do the prescribed fire there, as opposed to the San Bernardino Mountains, which are, you know, essentially a giant urban forest with all the development in there. So again, a variety of fuel reduction projects. We also enforce the fire safe regulations in the state, again, applicable to state responsibility areas. And this has to do with new developments or remodels. And it has to do with ingress and egress and, you know, how wide your roads have to be and how much clearance have to be next to the roads and what kind of water tanks you have to have. Also, you know, defensible space standards. So we go out and do these. I believe we've delegated this authority to the county in Inyo County, but in Mono, we still take these responsibilities. So if you wanted to build a new home in Mono County, you were in a state responsibility area, you would have to comply with all of these regulations when you're developing that property. What else do we do? Grants. That is a huge part of what we're doing right now. The state funded through California Climate Investments, which is the brand name for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Hundreds of millions of dollars we're giving out in grants. And these are the different grant categories we have. The fire prevention grants, we'll say, are the bread and butter type grants. So currently active in Inyo County. Let's see, there's a nonprofit called the White Bark Institute for Interdisciplinary Earth Sciences. It's a long name, and if any of you are on this call, I apologize. I call you the White Bark Institute. So White Bark Institute received a fire prevention grant to do community wildfire protection plans in Inyo County, to do some fuel reduction work around the community of 40 acres. They recently received one to do wildfire preparedness messaging and community outreach stuff, especially with all the seasonal visitors you get in Inyo and Mono counties. So the fire prevention grants pay for hazard fuel reduction, wildfire planning, or wildfire education. And then we have forest health grants, which are larger scale, multi-jurisdiction, landscape scale type projects. You know, we're 1,000 acres or more with several different landowners. And so the Inyo National Forest actually is a recipient of one of our forest health grants, and they're doing a lot of the work in I guess it'd be the Mammoth Ranger District across that grant. So at the unit level, we manage the fire prevention grants. There's separate Sacramento staff that manage the forest health grants. Then we've also got urban and community forestry, the California Forest Improvement Program, which there are several recipients of that in Mono County. And that is a cost share program to help small private non-industrial forest landowners do forest health treatments on their property. And so that can pay for thinning, pruning, limbing, reforestation, a wide variety of activities. And so if any of you are small forest landowners, and it's a minimum of 20 acres up to 5,000 acres, and it doesn't all necessarily have to be forested, please reach out to me, because this is an excellent opportunity. We'll cover anywhere from 75 to 90% of the costs of doing those activities. And then we also have the volunteer fire assistance grants for small rural fire departments to help get resources and training paid for. The Office of the State Fire Marshal, again, part of the department, they handle all the stuff you see on the screen there. So I'm not as familiar with the building codes and the state fire training and pipeline safety, but land use planning has a lot to do with when your counties or cities redo their general plans. You know, they work with them to update their safety elements appropriately. They also, in conjunction with the unit, we manage the Firewise community program, which is an NFPA, the National Fire Protection Administration. It's a voluntary program. You do some community assessments, you develop an action plan to help make your community more resilient and safe for fire. And that can actually, insurance companies provide discounts on premiums if you're a Firewise community. So again, if that's something that you think your community may be interested in, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Minimum of 8 dwelling units, maximum of 2,500, to give you an idea of the size of those Firewise communities. And also the Office of the State Fire Marshal develops the fire hazard severity zone maps, which where you are, there's not much in the way of the high or very high fire hazard severity zones, but for folks that live in there, that's significant. It triggers a lot of rules and regulations with which they have to comply. And so that's all managed by the Office of the State Fire Marshal. This is the fire hazard severity zone map. Again, over here, you see there's not much, but that's also because this doesn't map federal land. This is just state and local responsibility area. And so you can, again, Google fire hazard severity zone map, and there's an online map viewer. We also do a lot of public outreach and education. You know, if you were at Mule Days, we were there. We go to the county fairs. We do meetings like this. We also have a new mascot, if you haven't seen him, Captain Cal. He's a mountain lion. So Smokey Bear is a federal mascot, and the department decided that we were going to make our own, and now we have Captain Cal. So be on the lookout. And then you can visit readyforwildfire.org for a lot of information on preparing your home in the event of a fire, in terms of defensible space, home hardening, preparing for evacuations, etc. So, okay, the fire has come. Now what do we do? And this is, again, one of the things that we're well known for as a department. We have the engines that you see a lot, the inmate crews, we have helicopters, we own OV-10s and ST-2, we own fixed wing airplane tankers. We also have contracts for some. The federal government has contracts for the very large air tankers, and no matter what, the fire resources are managed under the closest resource concept. So because fire doesn't care about jurisdictional boundaries or direct protection area or whatever, whoever's closest to that fire is going to get sent there. And then we'll figure out the rest of it later. And that's very true with the aircraft, because, you know, depending on where you are, you may be closer to a federal or a state air attack base or a heli base. And so those are managed jointly out of our operational coordination centers. The southern one is in Riverside, the northern one is in Redding, and Forest Service and CAL FIRE sit right next to each other, and whatever aircraft is closest is what's going to get there. And then we've got plenty of dozers, and actually CAL FIRE doesn't own any water tenders, so most of those are hired under contract. And we do, you know, that we brag that we set up a city overnight. Well, we couldn't do it without the contractors and the people that sign up and provide those resources for the state. And so that's, some of you may be hired equipment vendors with CAL FIRE, and I want to say thank you, because we couldn't do it without you. Another important consideration is that CAL FIRE, we don't own any land like the Forest Service or BLM. You know, they own millions of acres across the country. We own several state forests, mostly in Northern California, but our total land ownership as a department is, we'll say, less than 100,000 acres, where you saw the Inyo National Forest on its own was almost 2 million acres. So that plays an important role in how we manage fires. So as a department, our goal is to keep 95% of fires 10 acres or less, because we are your fire department. We're there to protect your private property. I mean, life, property, and resources is what we do. So the decisions that Lance showed about, you know, do you manage it? Do you let it burn? CAL FIRE doesn't take that approach. If there's a wildfire, we're going to do everything we can to put that fire out. And that we have found that early and swift action by aircraft is the quickest way to keep those fires from getting too large, or doing the best we can to keep them from getting large. And so that's the importance of that, you know, closest resource concept for aircraft. This is a breakdown of the incident command system. That's how we, as CAL FIRE and also the federal government and FEMA, this is how we manage large disasters. Again, whether it's a fire or a flood or a mudslide or even any large event, we use these to plan, you know, large, if there's a funeral for a firefighter, we'll use the incident command system to manage that. And so this is just a general breakdown of the incident command system. And then the fire's out. Now what? We came in, we put bulldozers all over your property. We cut your fences, we smashed your culverts. So that's when suppression repair begins. So if there was damage that was caused as a direct result of our suppression actions, we will go in to the best of our ability with the resources and time we have available and repair that damage. So we string miles and miles of fence every year. We smooth out the dozer line to the best of our abilities. We either fix or repair culverts, or sometimes we just provide the resources because we don't necessarily have the capability to repair that culvert ourselves, nor do the landowners always want us to do it. But we sometimes, just say, well, we'll provide you the culvert and you can replace it yourself. And so this is the last part of the fire for us. And it can sometimes be very lengthy when you consider the Dixie fire that burned, I don't know, I was there for 70 days, a million acres. I forget how big it was, but so this is a significant undertaking, and it's probably not going to be what it was before we got there, but we're going to do our best to try to repair that damage that we caused. And if it was something as a result of the fire just doing its thing, we won't fix that. If the fire burned your fence, we won't repair that. If the fire damaged your culvert, we won't repair that. But if we run a dozer through it or over it, we'll do our best to replace that. And then also we have our Watershed emergency response team. It's soil scientists, hydrologists, engineering geologists, civil engineers from a variety of state agencies that come together and do an analysis of the fire and say, where was the highest burn intensity? Because that's where we're most likely to see slope failure or mass wasting. And then they say, well, where are the values at risk and associated with that, a community, a bridge, or whatever. And we develop a set of we don't do the work ourselves, but we develop a plan saying, if you're going to get this amount of rain over this time period, you should take these measures, including early warnings, evacuations, things like that. And we provide that to the local agencies. And that's it. That's who we are, where we do it, and what we do. This is my contact information. If anybody has any questions in the future, would like to discuss any of this further, again, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you, David and Lance and Chance. We have a few minutes left for questions. I did see one in the chat from Kelly. My understanding is that those wildfire coordinator positions have been approved. I know for Mono County they have, and I assume that's the case for Inyo County as well. And we're looking forward to getting those funds and hiring that position. So that's good news for hopefully, I know for Mono, and I assume for Inyo County as well, getting funds for those wildfire coordinator positions. And that comes from CAL FIRE too, as I understand it, David.
Yeah, I am not as savvy on that, but I know because I've been talking to the San Bernardino County about this, and I know that they are coming.
Okay, if you have a question, put your hand up and we can promote you and have you ask your question. Are there any other questions? A lot of good information from our speakers, a lot of good detail. I mean, we see the trucks go by, we see responses, and frankly, different colored trucks. And this kind of puts some detail and information into who goes where and why. And also the whole point of, obviously, you work together, which is an important thing. Looks like Jane has a question. Do you want to go ahead? Or perhaps not. Any questions? David, go ahead.
David, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Unmute. Hi, to a layman, and I mean this in the best light, so don't take this as a criticism. This way of fighting fires in the US seems really complex and fragmented. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with the way it's grown up. In your opinion, is there a better organized way we can do this as a nation, given the fact that we're going to be facing a lot bigger, longer, and hotter fires?
To answer, Lance?
I think from a layman's perspective who may not have been or is in the fire service, whether it's federal or state, the one, joining piece is that we're all based under ICS, which is that incident command system. And so that structure really unifies both CAL FIRE and the federal agencies in a real common language around positions and the terminology that we use when we're on fires or we're all working on a fire. So we can all show up to a response. And let's say it's in Mono County, and let's say it's on BLM land, and a Forest Service engine can show up there, a CAL FIRE engine and crew can show up there, BLM Lance could show up there, and we're all going to be able to work together because we all have common positions, and we have a common command structure that's pretty much exactly the same. And so we will end up being able to manage or work on that fire all together seamlessly. And so ultimately, on that side, it is a pretty seamless transition. Could there be better ways of funding a larger, federal fire organization? That could happen. But because we're all tied to different land management agencies and different departments, we do have help from county departments, from, folks from out of state. I think that's going to be very difficult, but because we're all under that ICS system, people can show up and they know their job and they know their role no matter where they're from. So it makes it a real seamless transition.
I'll say I didn't grow up in the fire service. I'm not, I fought some fire with the timber company because, that's the investment and you got to protect it, and went to some academies with CAL FIRE. And so there's been a very steep learning curve for me coming to CAL FIRE. And I'll say, ultimately, now that I've wrapped my head around the system, and it's taken being assigned to many incidents and attending many classes and reading many agreements, as fragmented and confusing as it is, I think it's all in all a pretty good system, especially when you consider the varying missions of each department. And again, when you own as much land as the BLM and the Forest Service does, you're going to have to take a different approach than CAL FIRE will. But I think Chance summed it up pretty well in that common mission and common goal. And when the time comes, the patch doesn't really matter. Oh, sorry, daughter's coming in. We're going to put the fire out.
Yeah, and at the risk of sounding like an academic, part of the answer, David, is when the founding fathers wrote the Constitution, they didn't set up a system of government thinking about fighting wildfires. By setting a federal and state and local three-tiered federal system with different jurisdictions, they automatically put us into the situation that we've just described. One could argue that perhaps if we really looked at issues like fighting wildfires, a unitary system perhaps does make more sense. But that was a long time ago. And as I think it's been presented, I think the agencies do a pretty good job of trying to work together, given there are different jurisdictions. We have another question there from Jane. Given the high risk, why are we still allowing campfires? We did go into fire restriction just recently, a couple of weeks ago, and that means no fires except in campgrounds, as I understand it, or private land. Do any of you want to comment on that? I know that comes up quite a bit. I was certainly relieved to hear fire restrictions are on so that there can be no fires and any dispersed camping outside of a campground. But any comments on that?
Yeah, you were correct as far as how you presented that. So CAL FIRE, correct me if I'm wrong, David, but what was it, about 3 weeks ago, suspended all public burns. Both the Inyo and the Bishop BLM lands went into what we call stage 1 fire restrictions. That was on June 6th. And those decisions are based on mostly our fire potential when it comes to our fuel moistures. But also there's a number of other factors that come into play as far as how much stuff is going on regionally, locally, nationally, as far as sucking up some of the resources that would be available to help us. Things are starting off slow now nationally as far as fire. It was pretty active about a month ago in Arizona and New Mexico. Things started picking up, but kind of in a little bit of a lull right now, knock on wood. And you know, here locally too, I guess it's worth pointing out, we're not necessarily, we're a little different than if you look at stats for fire causes here. The majority of our fires here are caused by lightning, where if you look at like at a national level and you look at fires overall, like 90% of them are human caused. We're not close to that here, but again, we try to do our best to limit the potential. We know, I mean, all of us here, I think, know that the increase in the amount of use that we're getting, especially in dispersed camping, has skyrocketed, especially over the last couple of years. So we've seen the need to go into fire restrictions earlier and earlier. It seems like, at least from at least my memory. So we'll see. Right now, it's only fires within developed camps, campsites, or private. And at some point, I can foresee us likely going into stage 2, which would limit those fires also in those developed campsites.
And then it looks like there's another question. Are there any controls regarding fireworks when there's high winds? Some of those may be, again, a jurisdictional issue, depending on where the fireworks are, but do any of you have any advice on that?
David, no?
I don't know much about the fireworks stuff. That's something you'd have to follow up with the local battalion chief on.
And I don't want to steer you wrong either. My gut tells me one thing, but I can follow up and get that answer for both jurisdictions there.
Okay, well, we're past our time. Again, thank you, David, Chance, and Lance, for your time tonight and for your great presentations. Thank you all for attending. Our next session, again, as I mentioned, is July 18th at 6 p.m. And we'll talk about specifically some of the fuel reduction projects that are underway. There's a very large one in the Mammoth area, and there's some smaller ones perhaps as well that we'll talk about. That will be, again, there'll be publicity and information out there as to how to sign up. So thank you very much. I appreciate everybody attending this evening, and we'll see you on July 18th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.